What the Pel is up, everybody? This is Pelicans Plus with Elliot Clough at Elliot Clough on Twitter. As you can see on the bottom ticker there, it is at Elliot Clough on Twitter. And then, of course, we are new on Facebook at Pelicans Plus. You'll definitely want to check that out, of course, on YouTube and Twitch right now, as well on Boot Crew Media's pages, as well as my personal pages. So before we get started today, make sure that you subscribe or follow, depending on where you are listening to the podcast or the stream as well. Drop a like and a comment on YouTube. Let us know what you're thinking of the Pels team right now, of the possibility of a coaching hire, and the fact that it hasn't happened yet. And that's what we're going to be talking about for today's episode while we're live. And before we do that, make sure you check out the more recent content that we've put out with Pelicans Plus. You can find it on our YouTube page, on our Facebook, on Twitter, everything. That article breaking down every single possibility for a head coach, being Fred Vinson, Charles Lee, or Willie Green. And you can find our podcasts there as well on all of these platforms that we're now streaming on. That article is on bootcrewmedia.com comparing all three coaches. Now, the news breaking in the last, I think, couple hours or so in regards to the Nets hiring David Vanterpool has kind of sparked this bit of worry throughout Pels Twitter, throughout Pels media, of people thinking that New Orleans took too long to hire their head coach and is taking too long to hire their next head coach. And, to a degree, I understand the irritation and the concern of it taking too long. To a degree, I really do, because of what happened last year with Stan Van Gundy and the fact that it took so long. They didn't get Ty Lue. They didn't get Doc Rivers. They didn't get Kenny Atkinson. They didn't get Jamal Mosley, Will Weaver, whatever. They didn't get somebody other than Stan Van Gundy. So I understand the concern. And we'll break down that here to start off the show. The Warriors, they've hired Kenny Atkinson. Like I said, the Nets, Vanterpool. Trailblazers have hired Scott Brooks, and the Magic have appeared to lock up Jamal Mosley to be their next head coach. And what I was talking about there was more lead assistants and just assistants in general, as opposed to Jamal Mosley being the next head coach of the Orlando Magic. And of course, we know that the Nets, obviously they got Steve Nash last year. Sorry, my mistake. The Trailblazers, they got Chauncey Billups. The Celtics got Ime Udoka, and then it comes down to the Magic getting Jamal Mosley. But staffs are getting assembled, and they're getting assembled in their entirety. And the Pels don't have a head coach yet. That, I think, is the big concern for a lot of people. They don't have anybody on staff that's guaranteed. Obviously, we know probably Fred Vinson, Teresa Weatherspoon, D House coming back, guys like that. And then Aaron Nelson, who leads the athletic training staff. That's kind of a guarantee. We pretty much know those guys are coming back, and including the woman, Teresa Weatherspoon, who's amazing at her job. But because a head coach has not been brought in yet for the Pelicans, we don't know that. We don't know what the staff is going to look like. Because if Fred Vinson gets the job, things get switched up big time. And even if he doesn't, he's probably going to get a promotion. Same thing for Teaspoon. It's nice to know, and it's nice to know that the structure is there going forward with this coaching staff. And for those of you who are listening, let me know, are you concerned about the possibility of the Pelicans not hiring their head coach for a little bit longer? I want to know what your thoughts are and why you feel the way you do. So, with waiting last year and Stan Van Gundy ultimately getting the job, was waiting to fire Stan Van Gundy 4 weeks the right move? That's where we're at now with the issue of waiting so long to hire a coach and waiting so long to fire Stan Van Gundy. There's a big disconnect there. If you're ready to make the fire, make the fire. Like, get rid of him. Don't wait 4 weeks till the season's over. Past the end of the season, I guess. And then wait even longer to make the hire. Because you waited so long to fire Stan Van Gundy, waiting even longer to make the hire, it messes up the flow of things. It doesn't it doesn't make you prepared to continue forward into the next season as soon as one would like to be, or fans at least would like to be. You got the draft coming up. Obviously, off-season stuff isn't really going on right now because it's not really the off-season for the entire league. It's technically we're still in the 2020, 2021 NBA season. We haven't moved into the coming season, so official trades can't be put together. Obviously, the cap is a bit of an issue. And then you got the potential that Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart leave. It's a difficult time to make trades because we're not in the new league year. It can happen, and it has happened, and it's happened a lot, but it's not something that people should expect to happen quickly. It just makes it difficult to do stuff like that when you don't know who your head coach is. And talking about getting rid of Van Gundy after 4 weeks, waiting a whole month to fire him before they decided to move on and go into the hiring process for a next head coach. I mean, it was the right move. Like, firing Van Gundy, obviously the right move. I was a little off on how I read the situation when it was going on. And as you know, I kind of like to calm the waters, calm the storm a little bit. That's kind of my niche in Pell's Twitter and in the podcast. And I was wrong. You win some, you lose some, right? That was my bad. But still, I think it was ultimately the right move. Just waiting 4 weeks really does not make any sense to me and to a lot of other people as well. Anyway, the coaching search should have started a while ago. It could have started a while ago. And there's a reason these staffs are being put in place already. They got to jump on it. They got a big jump on the Pelicans, who, you know, they had that stretch of games where they knew they weren't going to be in the running for the play-in or the playoffs, and they could have made the decision over that time period. Also, you know, focusing on the fact that Zion and Brandon Ingram and Josh Hart, Steven Adams, we knew they weren't going to play. So what do you have to worry about other than making sure all the young guys get time? You know, have the conversation. Talk about the fact that you probably want to move on from Van Gundy, not wait 4 weeks until the season's over. Anyway, it got done. That's what matters, right? Van Gundy is no longer the head coach of the Pels. That's a big deal. Obviously, a lot of people wanted him gone, and for good reason. Now, like I said, there are a few reasons for concern when it comes to the issue of not having made a hire yet and what has happened and what happened last year more specifically. The Pels may have lost out on who they believe to be their best candidate. Ime Udoka is the one that comes to mind for me. Not that he was the top candidate or their top choice, but he has a reputation of being one of the top assistants in the league, and he's a good guy. I was a big fan of Chauncey Billups, and now with this stuff surfacing about the 1997 issue, it would have added a lot more drama than necessary to this offseason with the Pelicans. As we know, the drama surrounds this team anyway for a lot of reasons. Zion, Griff being unable to make a correct hire / put the roster together, and Brandon Ingram's on the team, and Van Gundy, whatever. It was a lot this last season. And for the fact that, and it's been a lot this offseason as well. Last year, they wanted Ty Lue. I believe they also interviewed Doc Rivers as to whether or not they wanted to hire Doc. I don't know. But there were clearly better options than Stan Van Gundy. Ty Lue went to the Clippers. Doc went to the Sixers. That was kind of a given that those two coaches were going to go to winners because that's the type of teams that they've coached and had success with, not the younger teams. Ty Lue coached the Cavs for a little while when they were young, didn't have a ton of success. Doc Rivers coached, I think, a few young Boston teams, and I believe he was with the Magic before the Celtics. I could be wrong about that, but either way, the success he's had was with that Celtics team when he won a title, and then with the Clippers and the Sixers, even though they haven't won anything. But as far as the better options, other than those two, I mean, Billy Donovan was on the table. Nate McMillan was on the table. And then you get guys like Kenny Atkinson, Will Weaver, Jamal Mosley, Charles Lee, who they decided not to hire, and probably definitely would have been better hires than Stan Van Gundy. A lot of people would have been better hires than Stan Van Gundy, and we know that. The issue now, translating that from last year to this year, is that concern of, are they going to mess it up again? Are they going to wait too long again? Are they going to go out and hire an unexpected candidate again that turns out to be bad? I mean, Griff said that he didn't really take anything from this last hiring process in terms of what he learned. It'll be the same, whatever the hell that means. He says Brandon Ingram and Zion aren't going to be involved, which I don't believe for a second. How can you go away from or come away from this last season and say you didn't really learn anything, or there's nothing to take away from the hiring process of a coach after you fired him after 1 year? I don't know if this is window dressing like Griff loves to do, like he loves to dance around questions, but it just came off really dumb. Did it not? Like, I don't think Griff is a dumb individual. He's had his issues with putting rosters together and such, but that doesn't make sense. How could you come away after losing a coach after 1 year and firing that coach after 1 year and have not learned anything, or not? It said the process will be the same. That's a concern, and that's fair. Absolutely. That didn't make any sense to me at frickin' all. So I don't know. I don't know how he goes forward with that. Anyway, by what we know, it's down to 3 candidates, right? It's Willie Green, Charles Lee, and then Fred Vinson. And unless a surprise person comes to the forefront like we saw last year with Van Gundy, it's probably going to be one of those 3. And if I had to guess, it'd be the 2 outside guys as opposed to Vinson. But Vinson deserves his day, as I alluded to in that article and as I alluded to on our previous podcast. He's done so much with this team, and he deserves a shot. Either way, what it looks like to me is it's going to be Willie Green or Charles Lee. Now, I'm not that worried about what's going on here, assuming it's one of those 2 guys. Sorry, I was reading a comment by a fan. I'll post that here. It's a long one. I don't like how long this is taking, but I won't panic until the finals have been over for a couple weeks. There you go. Jamal, you hit it on the head. For those of you who are watching, you saw that comment by Jamal. He said he's not going to panic. He doesn't like how long it's taking, but he's not going to panic. And I was just about to hit that point. So Jamal, long comment. I wanted to share it. I'm right there with you. Because the 2 of the 3 coaches, we're just going percentage-wise now, 66.6% chance it's going to be one of those 2 guys as opposed to Fred Vinson. And they're both in the finals. How much can they do in contributing to building the staff and doing evaluation for the draft and talking with Griff when it comes to free agency and trades while they're in the finals? They're focused on winning a championship, and that's totally fine. That's the way it should be. That's the kind of guy you'd want to be your next head coach. It's like, yes, this is something I want to be a part of, but this is what I got to do right now. This is my focus. This is what I want. This is where I am. And so therefore, he's going to focus on that as opposed to going and being with the staff in New Orleans and figuring out who they want. No. Willie Green, Charles Lee do not come off as guys like that, nor should they. And Willie Green especially, I'm just a big fan of his. And if you've been paying attention to the pod, he's pretty much my favorite. And while I've got Fred Vinson up there because he's a hometown guy, I'm still a Willie Green fan. But once the finals are over, the hire, in my opinion, should be made pretty much ASAP. And for all we know, the hire could be made right now while they're with their teams in the finals. And that's fine. But nothing else is going to get done in the meantime. And if that happens, we can't get impatient that a lead assistant hasn't been hired, that maybe the draft evaluation hasn't gone quite on with the new coach. And not that we would know that, but at the very least, if a hire is made, it's probably going to be Willie Green. It's probably going to be Charles Lee. And therefore, Nothing's going to be able to get done until the finals are over. And sure, we're 2 games in and the Suns have looked really good so far, but there's no guarantee there's going to be a sweep. There's no guarantee that the Bucks are going to fall flat on their face. This may go 7 games for all we know. Suns have looked superior, but crazier things have happened in this world. We saw a 3-1 comeback by the Cavs just 5 years ago. So this situation is not something that I'm necessarily concerned about. Again, Jamal, who's listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, dropped this comment regarding he won't be too worried about it until the finals have been over for a couple weeks. And I'm right there with you, Jamal. You hit the point on the head. If anybody else has any thoughts on it, go ahead and drop a comment. It'll pop up here and we can share it with the rest of the people listening. But again, I'll just reiterate the point. It doesn't make sense to get too worried about the lack of a hire when both coaches are in the finals. 2 of the 3 coaches are in the finals. And sure, a lot of people wanted Vanterpool on the staff. Maybe somebody wanted Scott Brooks on the staff. I don't know why. He doesn't have the greatest reputation league-wide. But there are still options to go out and get a former head coach to come alongside Green, Lee, or Vincent as the lead assistant. And you've probably seen some talk of that. And that's really where the concern is coming from. And before I continue on that, it is a bit frustrating to know that these other people have a jump. These other teams have a jump on the Pelicans. But they also hired Rick Carlisle. They hired Jamal Mosley. They hired who else got hired? Ime Udoka to the Celtics. It's not the end of the world with these hires. Personally, I think the loss is losing out on Vanterpool to the Nets. And that's frustrating. Obviously, you want the best staff possible, right? The frustration, the concern is completely valid. You want the best roster, too. You want the best staff alongside your head coach, especially a new head coach. Lee, 36, Green, 39. Vincent's 50-something, but he's been around for a while. Totally understand any level of frustration with the lack of a hire because Vanterpool's off the market. Jamal Mosley's off the market. And you want your best staff. But they're taking their time. They're getting 2 guys one of 2 guys, more than likely, who's already in the finals, and that's great. We got this comment here from James Smith Jr. Says he thinks the Pelicans know who it'll be. Probably already told the coach he is hired, just waiting for the finals to announce it. Right there with you, James. Awesome point. Also, follow me on Twitter, bro. You've been interacting with me for a while. Follow me on Twitter. It's right down there. And then that guy, Jaywalk, who's interacted with us for a little while. I love it, man. That's great. He said maybe we can get Gentry to be our offensive coordinator. I love that. That's so funny. Anyway, I doubt it. But anyway, thank you, James. Anyway, in my opinion, it's going to be Green. I think he's the most qualified. I think he's a vet in the NBA. We know he's great at building relationships. And we've seen the clips of Monty Williams talking to his team as of late. Green is really an extension of Monty Williams, and he can learn from the mistakes that Williams made in New Orleans. He's learned a lot from Monty. They've instituted the defense together. Chris Paul has been a big part of that. And Green has a great relationship with Chris Paul. And right there, James, you're way ahead of me, bro. So I appreciate all you who are engaging right now. James, thanks so much for doing that. I have been talking, and I was planning on talking about this a little bit, and I mentioned Green probably being the next head coach of the Pelicans. That's the way I see it. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. That's certainly a possibility. But there are still awesome options out on the market for another lead assistant who's been a head coach before. And like I said, James hitting it way before I'm able to get to it. Great point, man, is that Mike Brown is still on the market. He's been a head coach before. He was with Cleveland when LeBron was young. Brett Brown, who I don't want as a head coach, but could certainly have a lot to offer as a lead assistant. He's been with Greg Popovich as an assistant, and adding that sort of experience and reputation to the staff, along with Green, who's been a player, who's great at the relationship stuff, who's good at defense, that would be an awesome addition. And then another Mike, bear with me for a second here. He was on staff with the Nets this last season. And because Willie Green is so awesome at instituting defense, the Suns' defense, virtually all him. He had the reins on that. What if the Pels bring in Mike D'Antoni to complement whatever Willie Green does as a lead assistant? Because he's been a head coach before. He might not have quite the connection as a Willie Green would because he's a former player, because he's been in New Orleans. But the addition of a Mike D'Antoni to that staff, who's been around the league before, had some playoff experience, played with Coach Steve Nash, Coach Kobe. Obviously, that didn't go great. Coach James Harden, Coach Chris Paul. Obviously, you don't want to bring in another over the age of 60 guy to lead your team. But he's been in the league for a long time. He's with the Nets this year, an incredibly talented Nets team. And if you put him secondary in leadership to Willie Green, that could be really fun. That could be really fun. Now, it doesn't have to be a former head coach that's the lead assistant. And if anybody's watching and has an opinion on anything I'm saying, just drop it in the comments. I'll see it right here. I can share it on the page right here, whether you're listening on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, what have you. I'll go ahead and share the comment on the screen so everybody can see it, and I'll mention it on the podcast as well. And then there's guys that haven't been head coaches before, but have been in the league and know the game of basketball. And that's Wes Unseld Jr., that's Sam Cassell, that's Jordy Fernandez, Dave Jorger, and then a guy who hasn't been in the league very long, but was considered for the head coaching position for the Pelicans last year in Will Weaver. Weaver, again, is a bit of a concern for me. I don't necessarily think that he's ready for something like that, and that would bring a lot of youth to the Pelicans staff on a young team in terms of the roster too. So I'm not huge on Weaver being the lead assistant. It would be one of those sexy hires, though, where you come away you're like, yeah, we got Will Weaver. And he's a great offensive basketball mind as well. Kind of took what the Bucks did defensively when he was the head coach of the Kings. So there you go. I think that it would be interesting to see what he brings to the table. Jordy Fernandez, a young name that's in the league. Wes Unseld Jr. in the running for the Wizards job. And Dave Jorger, I think he was the head coach of the Kings before. And then, of course, Sam Cassell, who is possibly in the running for a job as well. And James coming in clutch one more time saying that Sam Cassell would do wonders for our guards. Cassell was on Austin Rivers' podcast, I think last year or maybe 2 years ago, before when he was on the staff, I think with the Rockets. Check that out if you're interested in Sam Cassell. Those two have a great relationship. They talk about the work that they've done together. And I mean, a lot of people wanted Cassell as a head coach in New Orleans or in Washington, and he might get that job in Washington, but he'd be fantastic as a lead assistant as well. I love Sam Cassell. He's been in the league for a long time, played for a long time, was on staff with the Clippers, and now on staff with the 76ers, has a great reputation, and is well respected around the league. And again, this is all assuming that either Unseld or Fernandez, who hasn't been rumored for this, but or Cassell don't get the Washington job, which is definitely a possibility. So now what I'm getting at when I'm saying all of that is that the Pelicans still have options. That guy Jaywalk, dude, you're coming in with the jokes, man. That's hilarious. Okay. Anyway, the Pels still have options. And the timeline, it's too early to freak out yet. I understand the irritation and wanting the hire now. That's the society we live in, right? I want it now. Give it to me now. And we're just having to stay patient, which can be annoying. And I totally, totally get it. But the Pelicans still have options, and they have some really, really solid options. Again, not only for head coach, but for assistant coach. And in particular, I personally, again, think it's going to be Willie Green, who is the next head coach of the Pelicans. And as far as an assistant head coach or a lead assistant, Brett Brown, Mike D'Antoni, Will Weaver, Wes Unseld Jr., Jordy Fernandez, Dave Jorger, Sam Cassell. There are a ton of options, and there are a ton of really, really good options for the Pelicans. So in my opinion, it's not time to freak out quite yet. I really like the idea of the Cassell and Green pairing, as well as the D'Antoni and Green pairing, but we will see how it all shakes out. I honestly would be happy with just about any way it goes with Lee, Vincent, or Green, and then any of those names that were added to a staff as a lead assistant. Also, one thing before we go, this will be it as far as the talk of, what if it's too late, in terms of hiring a coach. One thing before I go that I'll mention here, we have a mock draft coming up on Tuesday night through Pelicans Plus. It'll be on my Twitter feed. You can engage with us there. Exactly, Jamal. I'll continue here in a second, but I had to point this out from fan Jamal Hamed. Thank you, sir, Jamal Amiri Hamed. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, man. Great point here. We don't want Fred Vinson going anywhere. He could be promoted to lead assistant for all we know, and I think he'd be great at it. Either way, I think he and Teaspoon are getting raises and they're getting promoted. Anyway, mock draft coming up on Tuesday. It will not be necessarily, it'll be live, but it won't be live. So if you want to stick around for that, again, it'll be Tuesday night. We'll probably start at 6 or 7 p.m. We've got a ton of people from around the league helping out with the mock. I'll be picking for the Pelicans, of course, at 10. And stay tuned for that. We'll be posting little clips on my YouTube feed, and it'll be not my YouTube feed, my Twitter feed, and it'll be one after another where somebody posts a video and says, I picked this person, that's why. So I'm very excited for that. Got some really awesome names in on that with us. And with that said, anybody have any suggestions for who I should take at 10? If you do, I'll be posting a little preview thing on Twitter, and you can respond to that there, or you can respond to this video here. Tell me who you want, because there's a lot of awesome options. Right now, I'm on the bandwagon of Moses Moody, Franz Wagner, the possibility of Corey Kispert makes me a little nervous. I love his ability to shoot, but he'd probably go a little bit lower for me. And then there's the possibility of trading it. Who do you want? Jamal, you had me, bro. And then you say stuff like this. Kai Jones? We don't need another project at center, bro. If Jackson Hayes wasn't on the roster, I would consider it. But I, in my opinion, the Pels are in need of a wing, somebody who can contribute at that point on the floor. Now, before we go, make sure if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Malcolm Brogdon, there you go. Acquire him via trade. I love that. That's a good point as well. Before we go, if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, whatever, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment. Tell us who you want to be the next head coach, assistant coach, lead assistant, who the Pels should draft at 10, whether they should trade it and go out and get somebody like a Malcolm Brogdon. That's certainly a possibility. And, Miles Turner and all the typical names we hear about every season. So also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, whatever, subscribe or follow depending on where you're listening, and then drop a rate and review on Apple Podcasts should you be listening there. We're getting really close to 100, and with the traction this pod is getting and the momentum we're getting, the more rates and reviews, the better. So, folks, again, thank you so much for tuning in today. Once again, we are brought to you by Boot Crew Media. You can check out all the articles and podcasts that I've referenced here on bootcrewmedia.com. And I'll drop the article link to the comparing of the coaches here on the podcast and wherever you're listening to this. So, folks, thanks so much for tuning in today. Once again, I am Elliot Clough, at Elliot Clough on Twitter. And this was Pelicans Plus.